Real. Reaching eternity after life. We made a decision to turn our wills and our lives over to the care of God. Romans 12, 1 through 2. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Step 3. Our acronym for Step 3 is REAL. R-E-A-L. Reaching eternity after life. A friend of mine who knew all about my life history asked once, what was real to me? Addiction often causes the most important relationships and possessions to disappear from our lives. Career losses, losing our homes and belongings, divorces, damaged relationships with our children or other family members. The list goes on and on. Pondering that question, I realized if all was taken away, the only thing left I couldn't live without is God. God, G-O-D, gracefully overturning desire. The first 3 steps of a recovery program are very important. We have to have admission. We have to believe there is a greater power. We have to believe God is that greater power. Step 3 is making a decision to turn from our self-will and turn to the care of God, as we understand Him, to control our lives. It doesn't matter at this point if our understanding is strong or whether it is weak, so long as we can make a decision to turn ourselves over to Him. We give Him permission to do what He wants to do, which is care for us. God most emphatically will turn our weaknesses into His strengths if we allow Him to. If we don't stand in His way, we participate in a relationship with Him. He will use our weaknesses for His own glory. Psalms 32, 8 through 9. I will instruct you and teach you in the way which you should go. I will counsel you and watch over you. Do not be like the horse or the mule, which have no understanding. How very important those verses are to me. I've mentioned before how I've sensed a very strong appreciation of the Apostle Paul. I'm not clear why this is. We live very different lives. Comparisons are, he suffered for the gospel, whereas I suffered from alcohol and drug addiction. Thrice he suffered shipwreck, whereas I wrecked other people's cars, bridges, and light poles. Thrice he was beaten with a rod, whereas I beat up unruly drunks in the bar. He once was stoned, whereas I was stoned for 30 years. Our comparisons just don't seem to be compatible. Even so, I seem to relate with Paul's teachings. Paul's letter in the Bible to his friends in the book of Romans, chapter 1, 16. For I am not ashamed of the good news about Christ. It is God's powerful method of bringing all who believe it in heaven. This message was preached first to the Jews alone, but now everyone is invited to come to God in this same way. This good news tells us that God makes us ready for heaven, makes us right in God's sight when we put our faith and trust in Christ to save us. This is accomplished from start to finish by faith. As the Scripture says it, the man who finds life will find it through trusting God. But God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, evil men who push away the truth from them. For the truth about God is known to them instinctively. God has put this knowledge in their hearts. Since earliest times, men have seen the earth and sky and all God made, and have known of his existence and great eternal power. So they will have no excuse when they stand before God on Judgment Day. Yes, they knew about him all right, but they wouldn't admit it, or worship him, or even thank him for all his daily care. And after a while, they began to think up silly ideas of what God was like and what he wanted them to do. The result was that their foolish minds became dark and confused. Claiming themselves to be wise without God, they became utter fools instead. Chapter 2, verse 12, he will punish sin wherever it is found. He will punish the heathen when they sin, even though they never had God's written laws. For down in their hearts, they knew right from wrong. God's laws are written within them. Their own conscience accuses them, or sometimes excuses them. And God will punish the Jews for sinning because they have his written laws but don't obey them. They know what is right but don't do it. After all, salvation is not given to those who know what to do unless they do it. Sometimes verses in the Bible can come across pretty frightening. Fearing God can be a good thing. To me, it's merely a sign of his magnificence. Fear of a loving God. We must recognize just how awesome God is. I've mentioned before how God has the ability to use our weaknesses as strengths. I caution myself about feeling uniqueness. I fear of false pride towards myself. I am what I am. The gifts I have received are simply the gifts I have received from God. When I've spoken at AA meetings, there seemed to be quite an impact upon people resulting from telling my story. A large part of that has to do with the first 7 years of my recovery. 30 years of drinking preceded 11 years without alcohol in my system. The first 7 years of my recovery was spent behind a bar 40 hours a week with a bottle in my hand as a bartender. This is not something I would recommend to anyone on the face of this earth. In fact, I would encourage anyone that's in the bar business or any type of business closely related to it. If they're in a program of recovery, they should switch jobs. It's not an environment that we as individuals have enough self-will or strength to overcome our temptations. For some reason, it seemed every time I was able to get out of a position behind the bar, it didn't work out for me. I'd find myself right back behind the bar again. Through the strength of the program of AA, my taking the steps seriously, my living it as a way of life, God's grace prevailed. I maintained my sobriety. I had many people, a support group, who helped me get through those first 7 years as a bartender.